There appears to be an epidemic of teenagers, especially girls, often with autism, high functioning autism, suddenly saying that they are transgender, and a lot of bewildered parents out there wondering, what should I do? So if you're one of those parents, this is for you. This relates to a teenager who has been perfectly happy with their biological sex and suddenly declares that they are transgender. Now, before I start, I am not anti-transgender. I am not anti-transition. I am anti a system which funnels teenagers into medicalization, hormones, surgeries, when they may well, if left unmedicalized, they may well have desisted or decided they were not transgender to start with. In June 2018, our daughter announced to us that they were possibly transgender. This very quickly escalated to, I am transgender. That lasted for 6 months, and in January 2019, they became more comfortable with identifying as non-binary, which I'll explain in a different video. It's just a different way of looking at gender. Throughout the process, well, the very first consultation that we had with the psychologist, when my teenager said, I think I might be transgender, the psychologist was ready to rush this kid onto hormones and surgery. My daughter was 12 years old at the time. My daughter had not asked for hormones or surgery, but that was exactly where the therapist was heading, right from that very first consultation, without even asking what my daughter meant by saying, I think I might be transgender. And this is the point. Sometimes kids and teenagers do change their minds. Sometimes they try out an identity and then discover that it is not for them. And so with my daughter, I said to them, I wanted them to always keep an open mind and to always think critically and to evaluate lots of different sources of information. So not only the glamorized transition videos that kids often obsess over, but a wide range of information relating to the transgender experience. So your teenager suddenly says that they are transgender, and what should you do? The number one is don't panic. For parents who have had no inkling that this is coming, it can be a bit of a shock. The teens themselves are very excited generally because they've come to this fantastic realization about their identity. But the parents can be in a panic. There can be the various instinctive fight response, which is, of course, you're not transgender, don't be silly, which is unhelpful. Flight, which is pretty much the parent that pretends that this is not happening, and if they ignore the conversation or don't engage in it and the teenager doesn't raise it, then it's probably going away. That, in my experience, does not happen. And then the freeze is just where you are like the deer in the headlights and you don't know what to do. Any of those options, although they are instinctive, are not the most helpful methods going forward. So what I found is the first thing is to honor the communication. Thank them for trusting you with this information. And this is huge. The fact that your teenager has communicated to you their new gender identity that they have adopted, or they feel they want to adopt, or they're going to adopt, that is huge. That means your lines of communication are still open, and that is a fantastic thing. So thank them. Be sure that you're clear, that you're pleased that they trusted you with the information, and then, unless you have a view on it and you know where you're going next, the next thing is buy some time for yourself. If you're anything like I was when this announcement or the series of announcements were made, right at the very beginning, I sort of thought that I needed to make a comment, like a value-based comment, something like, that's nice, or that's terrible, or something like that. But you don't have to do that. Simply allow them to say what they're going to say, and then say to them, look, this is a very important thing that you've told me. Thank you for telling me. You've caught me a little bit by surprise. I would like some time to digest what you have said. Now, I've spoken to a lot of parents who've been in this position, and many of them say that as soon as this announcement is made, their teenager then asks for something. So if it's a girl, they will say, can I get my hair cut into a boy's haircut? Or can I get, a boy might say, can I go and buy a dress? So this time when the news is very new and you haven't had time to digest it yet, is a good time to say, I just need to catch my breath with this news. I need to absorb it, and let's pause this discussion. It's a very important discussion and I do want to come back to it, but I need to come back to it once I've had a time to reflect. And for me, there were things that my daughter was after. So for example, they wanted a binder to bind their breasts. I didn't know anything about that at the time. So then I said to her, or to them, I need to go away and research that. I can't say yes or no to something that I'm ignorant of, and you are so important, and this decision is so important, and this discussion is so important. I need to make sure that I'm well informed, which I'm not at the moment. And then asked her if she had any, or if they had any suggested sites for me to go and do some research on. So buy time was my second one, my third one. The fourth one is start your education. For a parent whose child is going through this, it is really important to become knowledgeable and educated. And it is difficult because there's so much information and misinformation out on the internet. One of the things I did early on is just kept a document with a list of links so I could go back and read the information later. It was very overwhelming to start with. Also, I found that a lot of articles, blogs, that kind of thing, would distill the information from so-called studies, scientific studies, but then they would misquote them. So they would say that a study reached a particular conclusion when the study either did not reach that conclusion, or it was only a minor part, or that wasn't actually the main thing that the study looked at. So it is important to become educated, because for most parents in this situation, this is the start of a long process to support our teenagers through this. And never forget that when your teenager believes that they're transgender or has a different gender identity, they're suffering from what's called gender dysphoria. Now, gender dysphoria is an intense discomfort when it comes to gender-related issues. So for my daughter, they have said to me they feel intensely dysphoric when they think about being female, and they feel intensely dysphoric when they think about being male. So while we are trying to help and support them, these kids are going through an emotional upheaval and turmoil, and we need to remember that. So when we're reading these studies, we need to remember that it's not just a statistic. These kids are going through something very difficult. And one of the things to be educated about is how teenagers with gender dysphoria or who identify as transgender are treated. And there's generally two different ways, and there's two different types of information available. One that supports affirmation, and the other that is gender critical. Affirmation is the process that you just confirm this new identity, whereas gender critical is, as the name suggests, more critical, not critical in a negative way, but applies critical thinking. So if we had right at the start gone down the affirmation route with our daughter, I believe that she or they may have been trapped in a false identity as transgender. It never rang true for me that they were transgender. I always had an open mind about that, and I still do, because this is their journey, not my journey, and their conclusion as to what they are and who they are is their conclusion to make. But I was very concerned from the beginning that the affirmation route, which is the one where, you change their name, you call them the opposite pronoun, you allow them to bind their breasts, you allow them hormones, then the next step is surgery. That to me seemed like a very radical and difficult approach and a slippery slope. My view was more, let's find out what's going on. And my daughter, like many kids that have gender dysphoria, also had coexisting mental health issues. So, and conditions. So there was extreme anxiety, extreme avoidance behavior, autism, various other things that coexisted. So my view right from the beginning was, if this child is transgender, I would like to have them in the best possible mental state before we make decisions that change the course of their gender path, I suppose. So start your education, but understand that it's an ongoing thing. There's always more studies, there's always more information. And one of the things I found really helpful is the videos of detransitioners. That's people that have believed that they were transgender and lived as transgender people and transitioned, so that could be socially or medically or surgically, and then later decided that was a mistake and then have reversed or attempted to reverse that process. And I find those videos useful to think about the mental process that they went through that led them down that path. And I've always said, I am not afraid that my daughter may be transgender. I am afraid that they may believe that they're transgender and seek medical intervention when they actually are not transgender. So there's a bit of a difference. So start your education. Don't get too overwhelmed. Just start absorbing little bit by little bit. And remember that when you speak to professionals, there's these two different outlooks. The next thing is getting support. And this, I mean, support for yourself as a parent. And the Gender Critical Support Board is the best support network that I have seen. It is a place where you can ask questions without fear of being judged or ridiculed. You can pose the problems that you have. You can ask other people's opinions. You can get their viewpoints. And it can sometimes be difficult to do that in other areas of your life. So, for example, you might find that if, like me, you wanted your child to keep all their options open and not rush down the transgender transition path, people will be very critical of that, and you will be labeled as transphobic, even though all you want to do is to get your child to make a proper considered decision. So the Gender Critical Support Board is very highly recommended. That's something that's really helped me. The other places to get support is you can do some blogging for these gender critical sites. You can read gender critical articles, and I have also found the Sasha Ayed. She is just amazing. We got a parent interview with her over via Skype. We're not even in the same country as her, but to be able to access her years of skill and knowledge in dealing with these kids with a sudden, rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is what it's called, where these teenagers suddenly overnight declare that they are transgender, that has been fantastic for us. So get some support, get a place where you can ask questions. And then the next thing, and this is actually one of Sasha's recommendations, is to build a good relationship with your teen. Now, I highly recommend joining Sasha's Patreon paid subscription. It's only $10 a month. And honestly, for me, that has been the best investment in educating myself and understanding what it is that my teenager's going through. Understanding in a way, obviously I can't completely understand because I'm not going through it, but understanding in a way of being able to provide them with support moving forward. So Sasha talks about building a good relationship and also how to build the trust. And even if you've lost the trust, and so if you're in this rocky place with your teen, I highly recommend that you you join Sasha's Patreon, because in her videos she even gives you the words to use. And I did that. I used the words, and some of them were things like, I'm sorry that I didn't listen the first time you told me about this, or something like that. You'll have to look it up, but it's the way that she explains it. It definitely, well, for my teenager, that worked really, really well and helped us get the relationship on the easy footing. And then really, really listen to what your teenager has to say. And this is for several reasons. One, obviously, you can't help them if you don't know what they're going through. So you might miss a clue. Whenever I interact with my teenagers since this gender dysphoria reared its head, I have tried to tune in to things that I can help them with. And so there's certain things in the beginning that they were requesting that I didn't agree with, such as getting a binder to bind their breasts. But there are other things that they were struggling with that I was tuned into that I could help them with. And so they start to see that although you don't say yes to everything, you certainly are listening and you will try and help them as much as you can. So this listening is really important. It also gives you a gauge as to where they're at with their mental health, whether there are any problems with self-harm, whether how deep a depression they might be in. So just listen. Don't try and convince them, because they are on a mission. They are convinced that they are transgender, and they might be. But if you don't listen, then you won't be able to know. So don't take what they say at face value, but don't try and convince them otherwise either. For them, it's a very emotional time. You're not going to change their minds. Don't argue with them, because that just makes it them against you. And if you get into that, you against them, them against you, it gives them an excuse to think or to say that you're transphobic, you don't support them. Now, a lot of these kids are getting the transgender information online, and they're actually scripts that other transgender kids share, or the transgender kids share. And one of the scripts is your parents hate you, your parents are against you, your parents don't care. If by your actions and your words you make those things, well, make it seem true, so you say, I don't want to talk about it, or you're being silly, or whatever it is, then you're validating what these strangers on the internet are saying, and it makes it easier for there to be a rift between you and your teenager. So early on, we decided that one thing that was important was to make sure there wasn't a rift, because otherwise, if there's a rift, it's difficult to have any communication. And then the third point was really interesting about avoiding toxic discussions. Now, by that, I mean anything that ended up with either you or your teen feeling unhappy, bad, cross, sad, mad. Obviously, you can't avoid it all the time, but I noticed with my husband, who's a lawyer, he would go into cross-examination mode with our daughter. And so he would say something like, so what's your gender identity? And then they would say, I am transgender boy. And then husband would say, what does that mean? And daughter would say, well, I'm not sure, but I feel like I'm a boy. And then my husband would say, what do you mean you feel like a boy? What does that mean? What do you feel like? And I could see he was he was trying to get answers, and he was trying to help. His heart was in the right place. But what it was causing was my daughter did not know the answer. And so the more he demanded an answer from them, the more shut down my daughter became. And in the end, I actually had a really good discussion with my daughter, and we agreed between the two of us that we would talk about gender issues without her dad in the room for a while, because it really made him, I wouldn't say unreasonable, but his manner of dealing with it made her feel less secure. I could see he was trying to help, but it was having the opposite effect. So if you're in a cycle and the discussion is toxic, then it might be that you get a family counselor to help. There's other ways of doing it. So yes, and I know Sasha strongly advises keeping the communication open, but sometimes, I mean, the open communication really only works if you really are listening and not judging and not interrogating. Now, the other thing, again, comes from Sasha, is about setting boundaries. And this is quite interesting. And again, please listen to her on Patreon, because she explains this amazingly well. But for me, this was something that was actually a turning point with my daughter. And Sasha explains it that if it's something that puts the child in danger, then it's reasonable to say no. And if it's something that doesn't put them in danger, then it's reasonable to say yes. So, for example, an issue that often comes up is, talk about from the girls' perspective, who believe that they are a trans boy, so they want to transition into a boy. They want to have a haircut, they want to buy boys' clothes. And then it continues down the line. The next thing is they want to change their name, they want to change their pronouns, they want to bind their breasts, they want to take testosterone, and then they might want surgery. So those are the kinds of issues that tend to get raised. Not all at once, they come in dribs and drabs. So very early on, I took that advice. I said, if it harms you, my answer is no. If it doesn't harm you, my answer is yes. And that's how I'm going to make these decisions. And it was quite liberating to be able to say, I am your mother. My job is to keep you safe. So we are not, I mean, my daughter was 12. We are not going to discuss surgery, and we are not going to discuss hormones. That discussion can happen when you're 18 or 20 or 25, whatever it is. That discussion's not happening now. And so that was really good to put that line in the sand. The things like hair and clothes, I had no issue with that. Some parents don't like it when their daughters cut their long hair. But the one thing I will say is that I did feel afterwards that I'd said yes to too many things too soon. So as I said yes to each thing, then they wanted the next thing more urgently. So if I had it all to do over again, I would have said, I'm okay with you cutting your hair into a boy's style, but let's just be sure and wait a couple of weeks. And then I would have said, okay, I understand that you want to go and buy some boys' clothes. We're going to go shopping in a month's time, something like that, just to, so that it's not like a speeding train. I did it the opposite. I went, yes, sure, haircut, clothes, took them shopping, got everything done. And the problem with that was then they were very hungry for the next thing. And I'll do a separate video on names and pronouns, because that's a whole nother discussion. And that was one that caused us a lot of problems, because I thought it was harmful to do a name change and a pronoun change to the masculine. My daughter thought it wasn't harmful, and so that's where Sasha's rule of if it harms you, you can't do it, hit a bit of a snag. We also need to remember that these kids are exposed to a lot of people who change their names and pronouns, and it's normal for them. So my daughter didn't know what my big issue with that was, but that will be a separate video. Then the other thing was binding was a big issue. My daughter wanted that immediately, and thought that I was being mean and harmful by saying no. There is a very good study that explains the physical harms of breast binding, cracked ribs, all sorts of physical harms. I did not share that with my daughter because it also, in the same study, said although they had this physical negative side effects of the people that were interviewed, and it was quite a big study, a large proportion said they didn't care about the physical harms, even when they were quite serious, because they liked it gave them some kind of psychological relief to have their breasts bound. So I never shared that one with my daughter, and that was a big bone of contention between us. But and I'll talk more I'm going to do another video on how you can support your child without affirming. And this was one of the areas where I was racking my brains as to how could I help them without saying yes to the binder, which my studies had shown were very physically harmful. And so in the end, what I decided to do was I offered to take them, or I asked them, so it was their choice, would it be helpful to you if we went to see a professional bra fitter to see if we could get a bra professionally fitted so that it will fit you properly, but also get one that's a minimizer bra, because a lot of women are subconscious about their breasts. And if we could do that, would you like to give it a try and see if that helps you? Because she's very self-conscious about her large breasts. And I framed it, and I make sure that I use my words to say, I want to help you feel better. I want to support you through the gender dysphoria. And so she knows, and it kind of makes them pause and see that you really are trying to help, even though it's no to the binder. Is there something else I can do to help you? And so that's what we ended up doing. Now, the first trip to the bra shop, the bra wasn't fantastic. It made her feel even more curvy and exposed. And so then we went back, and the second lot of bras we got really did help her. And she was very grateful for that. So that it wasn't just about the physical issue, that really helped her see that I am on your side, but I'm not going to get you a binder because I believe that it's physically harmful to you. So this is where setting the boundaries, I found, was really helpful. Then getting professional help. This is tricky. And most of the parents of teens that I've had contact with tell me that their teens not only identify as transgender or some other kind of gender, they also have a multiple of other mental health and sometimes medical conditions. So it could be high anxiety, it could be bipolar, it could be schizophrenia, it could be, there's a whole myriad of things. And so if your teenager is open to it, professional help can be very useful. However, and I will do a whole video on how to choose professional help because I made a big mistake. It is important to find out before you take your teenager what that professional person's approach is going to be. And so the first therapist we took our daughter to, in fact, we did end up going back to him because we had a discussion with him of our expectations. But the first time we took them to this therapist, the therapist was immediately suggesting a binder, suggesting hormones, and then suggesting that surgery might happen very quickly after that. And that set us back. So what we did was we went back to the same therapist because my daughter had built up trust with that chap. And we said to him, look, we're very concerned with the approach that you've taken. Here's our expectations. We are not going to entertain anything that will cause physical harm. The kid is only 12 years old. There's all these other things happening. They don't even have a sense of identity yet. Is there a way that we can work together? And that professional said, yes, they were prepared to honor our wishes not to be recommending binders, hormones, surgery, but to rather deal with the anxiety and the identity issues, including transgender identity. And so that worked for us. So professional help can be a curse if you get the wrong person, but interview them and make sure that you're on the right track. The next thing is, and this, well, I wish I had known this right at the beginning, was to slow down the teenagers. Once they have decided or discovered transgender identity, it can consume them. And so they will want the next step and the next step and the next step, quicker and quicker and quicker. And from the parents that I have been in touch with, those that have been pretty permissive to start with almost always regret it, because you think, oh, it's no big deal, cut the hair, that's fine, change your clothes, that's fine. But these kids keep pushing and pushing and pushing until there's something that you're not so fine with, whether it's names and pronouns, whether it's binders, whether it's hormones. There will come a time where you go, wow, stop the bus. This is, all happened in 2 months. I'm overwhelmed. How is this kid supposed to feel? And so this was one of Sasha's suggestions to us, was to slow down the process with our daughter was very keen on changing their name, getting everybody to call them by a new name. And Sasha had suggested on that particular issue, try and reach an agreement that that discussion was going to be put on pause for 6 months. And that is what we did with that particular issue. And as it turned out, when the 6 months was up, my daughter said to me, Mom, I'm so glad you never let me call myself that boy's name, at school because I'm actually not a trans boy. I'm non-binary gender, and if I had adopted that name at school, I would have been too embarrassed now to go and change it to something else. So the slowing down just gives everybody a chance to take a breath. It uh, lets them know that you're seriously thinking about what they've said, but it also helps, gives them time to think about it, gives them time to really solidify what it is that they want. So slow down was a wish I'd known that one. Then this is really, really important. And sometimes it's something that we as parents assume that our children know. This is always let them know that you're on their side even when you disagree. And this is why the setting boundaries worked really well for us, because when we said no to the binder, the breast binder, I could say that's because it's a health and safety issue. But I understand that your breasts are causing you discomfort and making you feel exposed. What else can I do to help you? And that really, that was very useful. And if your teen has been watching a lot of transgender material online, which most of them do, there's a bit of a theme and a myth going on that your parents are against you, your parents are transphobic, your parents don't love you, your parents are not your real family, you should leave your parents and join your chosen family, which is basically a bunch of strangers online. And so it's a bit of a, it's very similar to how cults brainwash people, some of the things and the tactics. So when you do things for them that you normally ordinarily would do, I've taken to always verbalizing it. So I got this with my own daughter. You know, I need a binder. You don't support me. You never do anything to support me. And then I found it very useful at that time to go, well, no, hang on a minute. That's not fair, is it? I immediately took you to get a boy's haircut when you asked for one. Okay, yes, well, you got me a haircut, but you didn't do anything else for me. Well, okay. A week later, I took you for a whole day shopping and we went to all the boys' departments and I didn't give you a budget limit and you bought all the boys' clothes you needed. And then very soon they started saying, well, you let me cut my hair and you let me buy boys' clothes, but you didn't do anything else for me. And as each thing added up and I kept reminding them of what I had done, the list of what I had done and what I kept reminding them that I had done grew. And it, even my daughter had to laugh and go, well, okay, so you've done a whole bunch of stuff to support me, but I still don't think it's enough. So you break the false narrative of I don't do anything to support you. So it's funny how our brains will focus on what supports our belief. So always remind them. So now remember, now I'm getting you another haircut. I found it helped. Then, wow, we're on to our last one. And this is really important, and this is really difficult. And on the gender critical support group, I'll leave the link below, but I see a lot of parents who really, this takes an emotional toll on them. Now, if your teenager is younger when they come out as transgender, it seems that they're more likely to mature and then revert back to their biological sex, gender, normal gender, whatever you call it. If they're older, they come out at 20 or something, then they're more likely to go down the medical path. And so as a parent, you do have to understand that there's a possibility that your teenager or your child, whatever age they are, when they're old enough, might go through medical transition, might go and get testosterone or estrogen, might go and have radical surgeries. And that takes a massive toll on parents, especially if you do not believe that this is a true identity for your child that you love. And so self-care becomes very important. I don't think I really know of anybody who's got self-care 100% tied down. Parents who help their children through this time tend to do extreme things. Don't exercise too much. Don't eat enough, eat too much, drink too much. I've even come across parents who have been very close to suicide over this issue. So as early as possible, try and engage in self-care, look after yourself the usual ways. Have someone that you can talk to, have your own therapist if you can, people that will support you. And always, 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 if things are getting to a desperate point, wherever you are in any country, every country has got a suicide prevention helpline. Ring the number and speak to somebody, because your family does need you. And even when things are feeling desperate, and if you end up estranged from your child over this issue, you're important to the world, you're important to us. Take care of yourself. And I hope that things work out for you and that you maintain good relationships with all those around you, especially with your gender confused child.